Okay. All right. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just read your biography, but of course it's Google has translated it into Bahasa Indonesian, so I will not read it in that language. I will read a short synopsis, and then we will move into questions. For all those who have joined us, thank you for joining us. And if you have questions, then we really welcome you to ask them live. But if you prefer, you can always put them in the chat window, and I will make sure that we get to them as well. So, Hannah Mary McKinnon was born in Manchester, UK, to British and Swiss parents. They moved to Switzerland when she was rather young, and she loves, I'm reading it off your website, so it's in the first she loves mountains, chocolate, and cheese.
Yes.
After completing commercial studies in Geneva, she worked as a PA for DuPont, and a year later moved to Neuchâtel and became a purchasing manager for a high-tech company that made motors for industrial and space applications. So very different to where you are today.
Very different.
She then returned to university, studying part-time for a Bachelor of Science again. And then a friend introduced her to a startup IT recruitment business, and she joined the company late in 1995. And then she actually rose to become the CEO over the next 15 years. It's always really interesting to see the path that authors follow, for sure. So things outside of work were hardly boring either. A chance encounter back in the dark ages of the internet in 1999 led her down the aisle with Rob, who is her Canadian rock. So she married a Canadian, which she actually lives close to where I live in Canada, even though I'm not there right now. And it was exactly 10 weeks after that they met face to face at the St. John Airport in New Brunswick, Canada, and they're still married. That's a crazy story.
It is.
Their first son was born in 2003, followed by identical twin boys just 16 months later. Wow. So on to her writing career, which began, you moved to Oakville, Ontario, which some of our members will actually know well, in 2010. She did a failed startup company or an early midlife crisis, but one morning she decided to follow her oldest passion and she started writing and hasn't looked back since. So how many books have you actually written?
The Christmas Countdown was book 10. 11 is scheduled for September, and I'm now working on book 12.
Oh my goodness, amazing. And
Yeah.
can you tell, so some people didn't realize that Holly Cassidy was obviously yourself, although it's not, if you read pretty much anywhere on the website, you can figure it out pretty quickly. It's not like you're keeping it a secret.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all.
Can you tell how many books is this the first book under Holly Cassidy or is there others?
It's the second. So the first was in 2023, The Christmas Wager, and The Christmas Countdown was book number 2 as Holly. But my third rom-com, because my second rom-com, my third romance, my very first book, Time After Time, was a romance, and then I moved over to thrillers.
Okay, so is there a preference?
I can't say there's a preference. I think they both present their challenges. I think I find thrillers easier in the sense that I've written more of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see the plot in my head and how it's supposed to all hang together. Whereas with rom-coms specifically, I found the difficulty is that everybody knows what the ending will be.
Mm-hmm.
You know these characters are going to end up together. So how the heck do you make it interesting? The advantage is you don't have to come up with this big twist that you hope most people won't see coming. But on the other hand, because there isn't this big jaw-dropping ending, because you know which character's going to end up together, you have to figure out ways of making the journey interesting, because otherwise, why bother reading it if you know how it ends?
So funny because I was reading this and the fireman, I was like, hold on, what's this guy doing? Who's this guy?
Yes, Fireman Joe. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
A little bit of a red herring to see whether he might be, a love interest. But it was always going to be Marco, wasn't it?
So just to reiterate for everybody who's joined us today, if you do want to ask a question, you're welcome to ask in the chat window, or if you want to ask it live, please do. There is a raise your hand functionality that you can employ, and we will put you on to ask your question. Otherwise, I have 6 million questions for Hannah. So Hannah, everybody's actually finished the book. Obviously it was in December, and we hold it the first week of January so that we give everybody plenty of time to complete the book. So if you haven't finished it, like you just said, there are no real spoilers.
Sure.
So yeah, I was reading the Christmas Countdown, and I mean, to be honest, I haven't read a lot of Christmas books. But what inspired you specifically to write a romance in the Christmas genre? And do you find it difficult to come up with new material?
So the long answer for what made me write a romantic comedy was the year 2020.
Mhm.
So the thriller Never Coming Home is not my pandemic release book, because there were plenty of those, but the book that I wrote in 2020 and it published in 2022. So 2020, cast your minds back only very briefly. COVID everywhere, tons of uncertainty, lockdowns, didn't know how this was all going to end, horrible situation. And throw into the mix that my mum passed away. She was in Switzerland, I was here in Canada, and I couldn't get there. Travel bans and the insurance company saying, yeah, you can go, of course you can, but if anything happens, you're not covered. You get COVID, you're not covered. You break a leg, you're not covered. You have a car accident, you're not covered. So the rational decision was not to go. And every day during this horrible time, I disappeared into my manuscript, Never Coming Home, which is a thriller, and it's told from the antagonist's point of view, but he's very, very funny. And I really enjoyed the fun part, the humor part. And I thought, I wonder if I could write something lighter. It would be so much fun. And then I saw Maggie Knox, Karma Brown, and Marissa Stapley announce that they were working on a Christmas romantic comedy together. And I thought, oh, I love Christmas. It's my favorite season. That would be so much fun. But how and when and why? And would I tell my agent? Do I just write it and then see if we can sell it? What do I do? So I did nothing other than scribble some ideas down, because inertia sometimes is just easier, right? Doing nothing is easier. Fast forward about 18 months, and my agent, out of the blue, asked me if I'd ever thought about writing a Christmas romantic comedy, no word of a lie. And I said, yes, I have, and I have some ideas. And that was how the Christmas Wager and the Christmas Countdown were born. So coming up with those two ideas actually were relatively simple. There's a hint of the Christmas Countdown in the Christmas Wager at the very end, an advent calendar such as the one in the book. The original one that the mum would make is mentioned very briefly. And as I was writing that, I thought, oh, I wonder if I could build a whole story around an advent calendar and just part the idea, and came back to it later. So those two, they certainly weren't effortless. Absolutely not. But the initial idea came relatively quickly. Then there's the whole, plotting and writing and editing, and we can get to that if people want to hear about that. But certainly the initial kernel of the ideas came quite rapidly.
So Dawn wants to know, and I mean, I think I know, but why did you do a pseudonym for the Christmas books?
So there's a couple of reasons. One is it's a different publisher. So I'm with HarperCollins, Mira HarperCollins for my thrillers, and with Putnam Penguin Random House for my romantic comedies. So that's one of the reasons. People have different publishers all the time and write under the same name. However, it's two very different genres. And some of you might buy your books, just see your favorite authors. Oh, she's got a new book out. He's got a new book out. Yep, I'll order that. And if you haven't seen the cover, the cover of my romances should give it away that they're not thrillers. But we wanted to be very clear that there's a clear delineation. This is thriller, this is romance. So that if people pick up one or the other, they get what they expect. And are not surprised that there are either A, dead bodies everywhere, or B, no dead bodies everywhere. And so we went with a pseudonym. And originally, Originally, I'd hoped to use HMM because, as we mentioned at the beginning, we're not trying to hide that Holly Cassidy is me. It's the same author photo it says in my bio. Um, but the publisher Putnam, they said, we'd kind of prefer just two names, first name and last name. But we really like Holly because I'd floated Holly May Morgan, and I kind of like that. And they said, we like Holly, but how about Cassidy? And I started laughing because Cassidy actually means curly hair. And this is real. Nobody does this on purpose, believe me. Um, maybe not anymore anyway. We used to in the 80s. I didn't need to. So Holly Cassidy worked out really well also because HC is Happy Christmas. So that was the reason behind it, the whole story.
I love that. Um, so when was this book actually written? Like, what were the months around the season? Because I always think about like writing a Christmas book in July.
In the summer.
Yeah.
So let me see. Countdown. I plotted in January 2022. Wait a second. 2023, sorry, it's 2025 now. Oh my gosh, okay. January, so 2 years ago, I started plotting it, wrote the first, my first draft, and then shared it with my editors. And the edits and all of that were done, I'd say, about a year later. It was
Okay.
around February,
Okay, so
March.
still like
So
wintry.
the first draft was wintry. The edits were not. It was July, July, August, September. So I was editing a Christmas book in the summer, which did feel a little weird. But at least I had the first draft. I had the winter months to write the first draft, so that was good.
And just a comment about setting. I know the book obviously is it's in a fictional place, but there was you alluded to places that I knew because I'm from
Yes.
here. And actually the Little Drummer Boy, which she speaks about as the bookstore, is actually in Burlington, which is the town I'm from. So I love that. I don't know. I read Eat, Pray, Love and like all the places that I had been, and it's always nice to know exactly what you're talking about. So um, do you always write from a place you've either lived or how does that work for you?
Not always. So very often I'll make up a place. So my thrillers, I often set my thrillers in Maine because we have family in New Brunswick, and when we've driven to New Brunswick, sometimes we've gone through the States. So we stopped off in Albany, we stopped off in Portland, and I really like Portland. Anyone who's familiar with the distillery district in Toronto, the old town of Portland in Maine, feels very similar. So I have set them around Portland, but in fictional places, so I can just have the places do what they need to do, like Fallbrook or Pineville in the Christmas Countdown. I'll just make them up so I can make the roads be whatever they need to be, or put the school wherever it needs to be, and I don't get emails saying no, 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 that's a one-way street, Missy. You don't know what you're talking about. But I have set various thrillers in Portland, in Maine, because I visited. The last thriller I set partially in New York, which was a challenge in itself because New York is such a beast. I mean, it's a character on its own, and I don't know it super well. But my editor, my thriller editor, is from New York. So she was able to point out a few things. And I have a few friends in New York. I was able to say, I've been to New York, of course, but I was able to say, hey, does that work? Or would that take 3 days instead of 3 hours? That kind of thing. So I do a combination. It just really depends. But this one, I knew it was going to be a fictional town. And I'd included a lot of my Swiss heritage throughout. And I thought, hang on a minute, if I'm including a ton of my Swiss heritage, I want to include stuff from my Canadian hometown, which is how it was a subtle Canadian invasion into Fallbrook, which is very much like Oakville, and as you mentioned, with a different drummer, the bookshop in Burlington.
Nikki just says here that she imagined it like Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls.
Oh,
Let's visit the idea of the Advent calendar for a second. Is that something you grew up with? What is the connection with Advent calendars for you?
Sure. Yes. So I grew up with advent calendars, the chocolate ones. My mum probably got one for myself and my sister. I don't know, until we had kids,
Mhm.
probably,
Nice.
that was what, and then the kids got them. It's just one of those things. And I remember my dad once saying, for goodness sake, Frida, they're in their 20s. We said, what? We like them. No, leave her alone. You get them for us, Mum. So she'd always do that. So there was certainly that attachment. And then when Rob and I got married a few years later, I made him an advent calendar
Mm.
with the 24 little pouches on a string with little chocolates inside and little love notes, basically. They weren't tasks and treats, they were love notes. Um, and when we had the kids, I made the advent calendars exactly as described, the way Anita and Callie's mum made them for them. So siphon off Halloween treats, literally, from all of their loot because they got too much anyway. And then string up these 24 bags and have task and treats alternate, laying the table, making somebody's bed. Very often it was chores. And then the stuff they would get would be choosing a movie, reading two stories with dad, staying up half an hour later, always strategically placed on a Friday or a Saturday, of course. And they were really fun. So yeah, I mean, the whole idea came from something, a tradition that I had with Rob and our lads when they were small.
Joe would like to ask a question live, so let's
Sure.
get her on here.
Hi.
Hi.
I noticed in your screenshot or view, there's very well organized binders behind you. Can you walk us through your process? I'm assuming those are your books.
They're not actually.
Financials.
They are not my books. They are. My husband runs an electrical contracting company, and they're the company files because I'm the accountant. So that's what those are. But yes, I can run you through my process for sure. It's funny, you can't see my sticky notes that are just in front of me with Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So I am what is known as a plotter. Some people call the opposite pantsers, people who write by the seat of their pants. I don't particularly like that term because it sounds a little, I find it sounds a bit condescending. It feels like they're just, a bit willy-nilly, which they're not. I prefer the term discovery writers because they discover the story as they're writing it, whereas I'll discover it as I'm plotting it, and then again, of course, as I'm writing it. So I have this process where I always need to know the beginning and an end. So I'll come up with a what if, typically a what if situation, or a character or a setting that really inspires me. Very close after that will be the characters whose story this is. And I'll know, or I'll think I'll know, what the beginning is and what the end is, because that gives me the journey and the character arc. So I always have those two anchor points. And then I break it down. I have 300 odd pages to fill, which is typically, I break it down into about 30 chapters, 3,000 words each. That seems, feasible. Not too big. If I think, oh my gosh, I've got to write 90,000 words. Ugh. But okay, 30 times 3, that's okay, I can manage. So I'll break my plot down into the major plot points, the various twists and turns, some of them, not all of them, but the major ones. And I'll set those as smaller anchor points and then figure out how I can get from one plot point to the next, to the next, to the next. So I write all of that. I've got little post-its now, which I'll expand into a paragraph or two per chapter. I'll do a photo gallery board with hairstyles. I never use celebrities, that's far too distracting. So I'll figure out what my characters look like. I'll figure out their backstories, where not all of them, again, just the main ones. What their backstory is, what has brought them to chapter 1, or whenever I roll them out onto the stage. so that when I actually start writing chapter 1, I have a decent understanding of who they are to write a, yeah, we'll call it a skeleton draft, because it's not a first draft, because I would never share it with anyone or send it to my agent or my editor, for example. This is just my we call it the puke draft, where it's just and you just get all the words out. And then I go over it, do self edits multiple times, multiple rounds. By the time I send what I would call a first draft to my agent or my editor, I've probably read it already anywhere up to 10 times. Just go over it again and again, and layer and layer and layer, just like a painter would, I would imagine. I can barely manage a stick man, but if anybody in the room paints, painters don't start at the top left-hand corner of the canvas and paint their way down perfectly to the right hand and bottom and sign the name. They'll do an outline, maybe, they'll fill in a bit and a bit more color here and the sparkle here, and it's layer upon layer. And with writing, it's very much the same. So it's a whole process that seems to work. And then once I get the first draft off to my editor, there'll be a period of maybe a month or two, depending on how busy they are, and then we tackle the structural edits. So those are the big ticket items, adding a character, removing a point of view character, or changing the order of things to speed up a book. For example, the one that comes out this year, we needed to increase the pacing a little bit, so we reshuffled things, condensed things, and then each round becomes faster because there are fewer and fewer edits until it's finally polished and sent off into the world. Does that answer the question? Okay, good.
Yes, thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. You're welcome.
You spoke about wanting to write something lighter and it bringing you joy when you were writing a sort of like the funny character in a darker book. Was there any particular character in this specific book, The Countdown, that you loved more than others?
I love Daisy, the cat. She made me laugh. Honestly, the scene where Callie gets stuck on the roof in her Freak in the Sheets t-shirt, I was laughing as I wrote that. I thought I loved the sassy cat. I thought that was so funny. And she was actually based on Daisy Rocket, was the name of my agent's cat. Carolyn's my agent, and as I was plotting it, I said, "Oh, I told her I'm gonna give Callie a cat, and they're gonna have this really weird relationship. I haven't figured out what it is yet." And she said, "Oh, you could call her Daisy Rocket." That was her cat's name. And then as I was writing the book, poor little Daisy, big Daisy, she was huge. She died. She passed away. So she's now immortalized forever in the book and on the cover, front and back. So she was really fun to write. Another secondary character who made me laugh was Dorothy at the games night, because she was just so hilarious. But I really like writing Callie. I both Callie and Anita, I really enjoyed writing the sister dynamic. I thought that was really fun, and I think Callie will always be close to my heart. And Marco, I mean,
Speaking of dynamics, the character dynamics, yeah, the sister dynamics were good, and we saw them like fight and like make up. And do you have a sister?
I do. I have an older sister. Yes. Funnily enough, it's more, I think probably more so the reverse. My sister, she's older, but she not so much anymore, but she used to be painfully shy in her teens and probably into her 20s too. And I never was. So that was quite funny. She's always been a little bit more reserved. I'm gonna see you in 2 weeks. I can't wait. It'll be fun. So yes, I do have an older sister.
Where is she in the world?
She's in Switzerland.
Oh,
She's in
okay.
Switzerland. Yeah. So I'm going to fly over and go and visit her and my dad.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
My next question is, so what does it look like from having written these psychological thrillers? And I mean, I'm sure their shelf life is like people are picking them up to this day, but what does it look like for sort of like a seasonality with a Christmas book? Will you wait until next year and then you'll see more sales, or how does that look from?
Hopefully, it's very different. It's very different because it's very weird. So the runway is very short because Christmas books either publish in September or October, and then honestly, as of Christmas Day, nobody cares.
Yeah.
A few people care, but they're not in the shops anymore. You can find them online, of course, but or in the sales bucket, but they're not going to be prominently displayed because it's not the season anymore. So that was a little bit odd. I had to get my head around that. But there's also a massive push. I don't think I have ever had as many events, whether it was online or in person, for a book in such a short period as I did for the Christmas countdown. I think just before Christmas, I think I counted 11 days in a row where there was stuff going on, sometimes multiple things. And I loved it. And I cleared the decks. It was just, okay, I am focused on the Christmas countdown. The other book is going to have to wait. So very often what you do see, or what we did see when Countdown came out, was that people discovered that one and hopefully enjoyed it, and then went back and discovered the Christmas Wager too.
Okay.
And of course, some people read Christmas rom-coms at any time of the year. Obviously, the biggest bulk of the sales would be in the period leading up to Christmas, but Christmas in July seems to be getting bigger and bigger.
Well, that was going to be my next question. There's a renaissance of Christmas reading. Okay, we talked a little bit about your about how you plan out your book, but what's your process look like? What does a day look like? You do this full time. There's no acting CEO any longer. So what does it look like from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed? What does that process look like?
It really depends on the stage. That's such a good question because it really depends on the stage of the book. So right now I am in discovery mode, we'll call it, but for my plot, not for the whole, I don't sit down, write chapter 1 and see where it takes me. I can't do that. I need a map. So this morning, for example, I was reading through what I'd already written. I was looking at the photographs, the photo gallery for the book, hopefully for 2026, I guess this would be, or 27. I was thinking about the backstory, writing characters' backstory. So it feels quite relaxed because I'm just making stuff up. As of tomorrow, I'll be working on my little post-its. I have them here, lots of them, little post-its. Better put them back in the right order, 22, 23. And translating these 28 post-its into chapters. Not whole chapters, just bullet points, really, a couple of paragraphs each. And then when I come back from my trip to Switzerland, I'll start actually writing the book. And then at that point, I set myself a word count target. So typically it's anywhere from between 2,000 and 3,000 words a day, roughly. And if I start in the morning and I'm finished by lunchtime, I give myself a pat on the back and I go and do something else. I have tried doing 4,000 words a day, and I have pulled it off sometimes, but I just, being that creative where you're actually filling a blank page, I find difficult to do that for the entire, say, an 8-hour day. But conversely, if I'm struggling and I can't get it done and it takes me till 8 o'clock at night, oh well, it takes me till 8 o'clock at night. I just have to get it done. And then once I've finished that first draft, I'll go back and I'll edit or self-edit. And it's generally the same process. I'll edit 1 or 2 chapters, sometimes more. And when I then get the edits back from my editor, it depends how intense they are. It could be, a 12-hour day for multiple days or weeks in a row. It could be lighter than that. It really depends. And it also depends what else is going on. We still have 3 lads who live at home and might need to be shuffled off somewhere. So then it really just depends on what else is going on. And of course, because I write a book a year, sometimes two, I'll be working on one book, and then the copy edits will come back for the one that's going to be released. So I have to chop and change. So it's very difficult to say that I have a typical day. There are typical days depending on the stage of the book. That's the best way to answer that.
So I thought of two questions. Sorry, ladies, I do see your messages, and I will ask all those questions in a minute. But I just thought of two questions that came up in what you just said, and I was wondering if there was a favorite part of the process that you liked or looked forward to, because I can imagine writing it is like, for myself, I would enjoy that, but then with the editing, I would be like, oh my gosh.
I think I'm the opposite. So I really love what I'm doing now because the possibilities are just open and anything goes, really. I could just make stuff up, and it's so cool to be able to do that. And to have ideas popping into my head. Today I thought about a twist for this next book. I thought, oh, that's so cool. I wonder if I could pull that off. That yes, and I make a little note and I geek out over it and get really excited. The part that I don't enjoy as much is filling those 300 pages or 200 pages for the first time.
Right.
Because I've plotted the book, I've thought about the backstory, I know what my characters look like, I've probably got a map, and I think I've done all this work, it should be written already. Why is it not written already? Come on. And so that part, not so much anymore, but that's where the self-doubt would creep in, and I would say to my husband every time without fail, this is the worst book I've ever written. My agent's going to disown me. My editor's going to hate it. It's awful. And then as I go through the edit, so I'll get to the end and I'll go back to the beginning and I'll go through it 3, 4, 5 times without fail. About a month or 6 weeks later, I'll walk in to wherever he is and I'll go, actually, it's not that bad. Every time. So I find the editing part, the self-edits, easier than the initial writing of. And then the editing with my editor can be easy, it can be really hard. Countdown was hard. Countdown was a difficult book because we decided to change Callie's emotional starting point from chapter 1.
Oh.
And that changed everything. It changes
Right.
every emotion, changes it changed so much. It wasn't a rewrite, but it was probably the closest I'd ever come to one, and the deadline was really short. So that was tough. That was tough. But thankfully the edits for this year's thriller were pretty light so far. So, you know, you take what you give.
Absolutely. The other question I had from your former answer was just about kind of advice to new authors. It seems to me, listening to you, that you're sort of the advice that, like, get it all out on the page and then you can sort of like fix it, but like get all those words out there. Is that your advice?
Yes. So I would never say to somebody, thou shalt plot, because it doesn't work for everyone, you know. So I would never prescribe that. I'd say try it, see if it works for you. But if you don't like it, if you feel constrained, which I don't, by the way, I'm never married to my plots. Things shift and go off in different directions sometimes. But if plotting, outlining doesn't work, don't do it. If it does, great. You know, maybe do more of it, or do some plotting, some writing, go back to plotting, do some writing. But certainly, yes, I would say that, and this is something I could not wrap my head around when somebody said to me, you have to give yourself permission to write a rubbish first draft. And I remember thinking, why on earth would I write a rubbish first draft and send it to someone? Well, I was missing the point, because you don't send it to anyone. That first skeleton, that's why I call it a skeleton draft, or the puke draft, is just for me. That's for nobody else. But you can't edit a blank page. So what I used to think was, I have to write a chapter and then edit it completely, and then write another one and then edit it completely. No, I'll write one and then read through it once, and then I'll write the next one and read through that one. And then if I'm having a bit of a day, I might go back and read the first few chapters and fix things to get inspired to write the next one. If I'm not enjoying, this happened with maybe it was the Countdown, actually. Definitely the thriller that's coming out this year. There was a chapter that was bugging me that I'd outlined, but I knew from the outline and from what I'd written that it wasn't working. It just, what I initially thought would work wasn't going to. And so I just wrote, literally, figure this out later. Insert page break, write the next chapter. And I think it wasn't until quite late in the process, obviously before I sent it to my editor or agent, that I filled in that chapter. But by that point, I knew what would work instead of what I'd initially planned. The brain is a really weird thing.
All right, let's get to some of these questions. So Sean was asking, was Anita leaving town always part of the plan? I often wondered how the advent calendar would have transformed Callie had Anita performed the task with her rather than Marco.
Yes, I always knew that Anita was going to be sent away on business and that she wouldn't be able to turn the opportunity down, and it would, throw a spanner in the works. That was always the plan. And yes, it would be a very different book. Maybe it wouldn't have turned out to be a rom-com if Anita had stayed. It probably would have turned into a feel-good fiction book, possibly, which it could have been too. But that wasn't the brief. The brief was another rom-com.
Daisy wants to know if you've thought of any characters to play the main characters if it became a movie.
Oh my gosh, this is such a tricky question because, like I said, I never think about actors. Of course, I think about having my stuff on screen. Absolutely. Of course I do. That would be my dream, or one of. Oh gosh. I don't know, but can whatever it is, can Taron Egerton please play a role in whatever goes to screen for me, please? Because I like him. He's fun.
If anybody has any ideas for characters that could play,
Please.
if for actors that could play characters, pop them into the chat. I always love to see what
Please
people
do.
envisioned. Tracy wants to know if the romantic chance encounter at a tree farm or other were based on real experience.
No, no, not the tree farm. No, I met Rob accidentally online, quite literally on ICQ, completely by accident in '99. Any of my ex-boyfriends? No, one was at work, one was at a disco. It was the '80s, give me a break. And that's about it. Yeah, so nothing as fun as the tree farm, although obviously ICQ worked out well for us.
But ICQ was not a dating platform, was it? It was like just
No,
a thing. I remember
it
that.
was a chat site, and it was the first night I had the internet installed at my house, and
Wow.
a random search spat out this character Rob, and that was it. That was it.
Wild. And he was
Yep.
he was in Canada and the East Coast.
On the East Coast, and I was in Switzerland, and we sent a couple of messages and then went into split screen mode so we could see what the other one was typing. Then he gave me his phone number and I called him and talked all night, literally all night, until I had to go and have a shower and go to work. And that was that. 10 weeks
And he
later,
happened to be a
see it.
similar age to you, because this you could have been any age at all.
Yeah, 28. Yeah, he was 28. I was 27. We're a year apart.
Oh my goodness.
And it was, yeah, really, really the most bizarre thing, but the most wonderful too. Best thing that's ever happened. And I have never, ever, ever, ever in my life, not before, not since, been so sure of anything.
Wow.
We just knew we were going to get married, and he booked his ticket, his plane ticket to fly back with me to Switzerland before I had even got there to St. John. So yeah.
So wild. That's such a great story.
It's so wild. Yeah.
I know what ICQ is. I'm not sure if everybody does. I'm like envisioning this whole thing happening.
Yeah. No photographs.
No.
There were no pictures. No. This was the era when you could either be online or on the phone. Photographs, if you sent them by email, they downloaded in sections, and dial-up modems.
Yeah.
That one, yeah.
I love that.
Old school.
Rita asked a question which you have answered actually, but maybe there's more to the answer. Were there major edits from the editor for Christmas Countdown, like characters added or removed or plots changed?
Characters added and removed, no. The Callie's character was developed a little bit differently because initially we'd envisaged her to be a lot sadder than she was. Not sadder, but not over the breakup yet. More heartbroken than she is in the book. She's sad, but she's not pining after Oliver, which she was in the original draft, and we felt that wasn't working as much as it could if she weren't. So that was probably, it was the emotional arc for Callie that was the biggest change because it had such a big impact on the rest of the manuscript. But adding characters, no. Removing them, no. I don't. Maybe I combined a couple, and we reshuffled the scenes a little bit. The tasks and treats originally were in a slightly different order. But yeah, they were quite. They were. It's funny how it sounds like, oh well, the emotional arc, that shouldn't be too tricky to change, but it really was. It was quite a lot of work. But it turned out they know best. Honestly, they really do. So I'm really happy with the suggestions they made.
Tracy wants to know if you've ever worked through creative blocks. Do you allow yourself to step away for a significant period of time, or do you have exercises that help you push through?
Great question. So when you have a deadline, I can't really allow myself to have creative, writer's block or whatever. But when let's say there are days where I'm just not inspired, where it's just not flowing like I would like it to. So sometimes I'll just set a timer for 20 minutes and say, okay, I'm just going to write. It's going to be rubbish, but at least I'll have something. And then often it turns into something that I can actually use. I might rewrite or sometimes I'll just skip ahead, like I mentioned earlier. And sometimes I'll just go out for a walk and say, okay, I'm going out for a walk, but I'm not going to listen to an audiobook. I'm not going to listen to music. I'm just going to think about what is bothering me with this book and see if I can noodle it around. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I just say, you know what, it's just not working today. I'm going to go and do something else, something fun. And invariably, I'll be doing something mundane or benign, and a solution will present itself because my brain isn't trying to, focus on whatever it is that's bothering me so much. Like I said, the brain's a really wonderful thing.
Oh, Camilla, when you write, does it play in your sorry, another one. Does it play in your head like a movie? Like, are the characters alive in your head?
Yes, yes, they are. I talk to them. I hear their conversations. It's very weird. But yes, I do write. Often I write what I see in my mind. And then, of course, I'll Google pictures of different houses and settings and whatnot. But I think I hear the dialogue the most. I hear how they're conversing with one another, or that I'll think of something. I'll think, oh no, Callie would never say that. She'd never do that, but she'd do this. It's very. I walk around muttering to myself a lot, which my family finds very amusing and perhaps slightly scary.
Sean actually has a good comment here. The puns were a lot of fun. My fave was LIFO, the party, as I work in purchasing, and it's rare to see those types of references. Makes more sense now that she knows you have a purchasing background.
Last in, first out. Yep.
My question for you about that is, how do you think your prior career has helped shape you as an author?
Oh, immensely. That's a great question too, because in so many ways, I mean, the networking I used to do a lot professionally, and I've done a lot of that as an author, and I love it. I love meeting new people. I love meeting new authors. I love meeting anyone in the industry. I think it's just super fun, and I love doing that. And I'm not shy, so I find that relatively easy. The other thing is that deadlines are hugely important, and I don't miss deadlines. I just don't. That's just, I don't know what that is. I don't know if it was my parents or something. Thou shalt not miss a deadline. And I just don't. And the other thing that I've been able to do when I worked in IT recruitment, I did a lot of projects. So for example, opening a subsidiary in Germany, or bringing all of the subs together to a holding structure, or when we sold the company, I led the due diligence for that too, created the entire back office structure well before that. So having done a lot of projects, it was often stuff, most of the time it was stuff I'd never done before. But that didn't faze me, because I knew I could lean on people and find people who could help me figure out what needed to be done. As long as I could lead this project and surround myself with people who are experts in those areas, we would get it done as a team. And that worked really, really well, because I would never profess to be the best person at everything. Maybe at leading, sure, and coordinating, sure, but not all of the other bits and bobs. And so when I'm writing a book, I just break it down, like I mentioned with my plot, because that's what I used to do when I was working projects. End game, open a subsidiary in Germany. Okay, what are the steps to get there? What are the mini steps in each step? How do we do this? So it's very much the same with books. And similarly, I have a lot of people who can help me, say, with the medical advice. This would be more for my thrillers. Anything to do with murdering people, fictional people. I have contacts for that. And if I don't have a contact for a specific question, I'll just, for example, Google a funeral home in the Catskills and dial the number. I don't send emails. I'm old school. I'll just pick up the phone and give them a call and say, hi, I'm Mary McKinnon. I'm a thriller author. Honest, I've got a question. Could you help me? And they always say yes. They're so generous with their time, and it's so much fun. So that has definitely helped, all the organizational skills, and simply the fact also that I understand that this is a business. Publishing is a business. Publishers need to make money. If they don't make any money, they can't employ, as it were, people like me to write books. That's just the way it is. And so I have a very good understanding of that too, which definitely helps.
We're running out of time, but before we go, we would like to know what you're working on. If you can tell us anything, or what
yes,
not necessarily what
yes.
you're working on, but what is coming out.
What's coming up? So on September the 9th, the next thriller is called A Killer Motive. And it is about a young woman, Stella, who takes her younger brother to a beach party. He's grounded at home and he's not supposed to be going out, but she gets him out of the house, and he disappears, vanishes into thin air. And of course, she feels immensely guilty. 6 years later, she's a true crime podcast host. And she says on the radio, while she's promoting her show, that if she ever had any indication or a clue that something untoward happened to her brother, she would go to beyond the ends of the earth to find him and bring the perpetrator to justice. And a couple of days later, she gets an email from somebody who allegedly knows what happened to Max, but doesn't tell her who he is, and invites her to play a game. And if she wins, she'll get some information about her brother's whereabouts. So that's coming in September.
Oh, wow, that sounds great.
Thank you.
And will you write another Christmas book for next year, or are you writing a Christmas book?
Not for next year. No, not for next year. I'm playing around with a couple of ideas. I'm not yet sure if it'll have the Christmas element to it or not. It could, but not necessarily. So I'm not quite sure yet.
But
I would like to.
She can write rom-coms. She doesn't have to just write Christmas rom-coms, right?
That's very true. Yeah, exactly. Anything that isn't thrillers, really.
Right.
Anything lighter. Yeah.
And as a very, very last question, if there's any authors that you love or any books you've recently read, I know you probably get to read some arcs. So anything that we can keep an eye out for, then that would be great.
Yes, of course. So I know I'm late to the party, but I just read Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I have a total author crush and character crush because I loved that book and I loved Carrie. I thought it was just a brilliant book. I loved it. One more recent that I've read, just finished yesterday, was Detective Auntie by Uzma Jalaluddin. So she typically writes romantic comedies, and this is her first cozy mystery.
Okay.
And it is really, really fun. And it publishes, I think it publishes in May.
Okay.
And one thing I loved about that is that the protagonist is 57, which you
Wow.
don't necessarily
Yeah,
see,
you're
but it's
right.
it feels young and fresh, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a really, and set in Toronto, which is really fun too.
Oh, cool. That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and a big thank you to Hannah for hopping on very last minute.
My pleasure.
And we'll post this. We've got it recorded now, so we'll post it on all of our sites. And good luck with the writing process in 2025.
Thank you. And thank you for choosing Countdown. I really, really appreciate it, everyone. Thank you for coming today.
Take care. Bye, everybody.